Good evening and welcome. Wherever you are in the world, I invite you to pause for a moment and notice the space around you. Perhaps you're listening in the quiet of your bedroom, the glow of a city beyond your window. Maybe you are on a night shift break, earbuds carrying this voice into the stillness, or perhaps you're lying somewhere far from noise, listening as the day gives way to darkness. Wherever you are, and whatever the hour may be, you are part of a circle of dreamers, people across the globe, connected in this moment, bound by curiosity and a desire to drift gently toward rest. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these journeys, the kind that stir both imagination and sleep, I invite you to join this circle more permanently. You can do that by simply subscribing, not as an obligation, but as an offering, a way of telling the universe that you wish to keep exploring its mysteries in good company. Like lighting a lantern along the path, it ensures you'll always find your way back here. Now, let's begin. Tonight, we are traveling into deep time, a time before humans, before mammals, before the world even resembled the map we know today. Imagine all the continents you've ever seen on a globe or atlas. Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, Australia. Imagine them not scattered across oceans, but fused together, joined in a single colossal landmass. That landmass had a name: Pangea. Science tells us Pangea formed around 35 million years ago and endured for nearly 60 million years. Fossils, rocks, and the patterns of Earth's crust confirm its existence. But beyond the certainty of geology lies the silence of lived experience. We know that Pangea was real, but what did it feel like? What did it look like, smell like, sound like, to stand on its vast plains or walk its endless coasts? These are questions no fossil can answer fully, and so imagination steps in where data ends. Picture a world where deserts stretched across interiors larger than modern continents, where storms gathered strength across an ocean so vast it seemed endless, where strange forests grew and fell, their remains compressed into the coal seams we mine today. Creatures walked this land that are both familiar and alien, the ancestors of reptiles, amphibians, large enough to challenge crocodiles, and the first experiments in forms that would later dominate as dinosaurs. Science offers models, reconstructions, maps drawn from evidence. Yet beyond those boundaries lies the mystery that pulls us closer. What was Earth truly like during Pangea? Was it a land of unbearable extremes, or were there hidden sanctuaries where life thrived in ways we cannot yet see? Did its endless horizons inspire, in some unrecorded way, the earliest whispers of the planet's own memory? Stories etched not in human words, but in stone, climate, and the DNA of creatures that still walk the earth today. As you listen tonight, you don't need to hold on to every detail. This is not a lecture. It is a slow unraveling, meant to carry you gently between curiosity and rest. Let the images rise and fade like dreams, mountains higher than the Himalayas, deserts larger than any modern wasteland, oceans wide and unknowable. Let the rhythm of deep time remind you how small our daily worries are, and how vast the story of Earth truly is. So settle in, breathe slowly. You are safe here, part of a gathering of wanderers who drift not across maps, but across ideas. Together, we will explore Pangea, not just as a scientific fact, but as a dream of forgotten ages. And as we begin, hold this question close. If the Earth remembers more than we will ever know, what secrets still sleep within the silence of Pangea? To understand Pangea, we first need to grasp the strange logic of continents, how they move, collide, and reshape themselves over time. For most of human history, people believed the Earth's landmasses were fixed, anchored like immovable stones. Mountains, rivers, and seas seemed eternal, too vast to shift. It wasn't until the 20th century that science revealed the truth. The continents themselves are wanderers, floating slowly across the surface of the Earth, on great slabs of rock we call tectonic plates. One of the first to see the hidden pattern was a German meteorologist named Alfred Wegener. In 1912, he proposed the radical idea that continents drift. His reasoning was simple, but profound. He noticed how the coastlines of South America and Africa seemed to fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. He saw similarities in fossils and rock layers found on both sides of the Atlantic. To him, these were clues that the continents had once been joined in a single vast landmass. He called this idea continental drift. At the time, most of the scientific community dismissed it. They argued, was too solid for such movement. But Wegener held firm, convinced that beneath the surface lay the secret of the wandering continents. Today, we know he was right. The mechanism is plate tectonics, the slow, steady movement of Earth's crust atop a molten mantle, driven by heat from the planet's core. Plates shift a few centimeters each year. Over millions of years, these small motions accumulate, redrawing the map of the world. Oceans open and close, mountain ranges rise and erode, and continents collide and split apart. The Earth is not static. It is alive with motion, its surface restless and ever-changing. To imagine this is to see time differently. A map is no longer a snapshot of permanence, but a single frame in a film that plays over hundreds of millions of years. What feels fixed in our lifetimes, the familiar outline of Africa, the sweep of Asia, the island of Australia, is in truth temporary. Given enough time, even the Atlantic Ocean will close again, and a new supercontinent will form. Just as continents once gathered into Pangea, they will one day merge anew. Earth's story is cyclical, its continents assembling and dispersing in a slow cosmic dance. But let us return to the puzzle itself, to the great experiment of putting the world back together. If you trace the jagged edge of South America and nestle it against Africa, the fit is undeniable. Slide India back into its ancient cradle against Madagascar and Antarctica. Shift Australia northward. Piece by piece, the modern continents align until they form a single colossal landmass surrounded by a vast ocean. Pangea, the satisfaction of the fit, is both visual and scientific. Fossils of the same plants and animals, separated now by oceans, line up across once joined shores. Rock formations match like broken bones healed back together. The puzzle confirms itself. Yet there is mystery here too. Why did it take so long for the scientific community to accept such an elegant solution? Part of the answer lies in evidence, part in human reluctance. The idea that continents drifted seemed impossible without a known mechanism, without proof of how, even strong clues of what remained suspect. Only decades later, when the mid-Atlantic ridge was discovered and seafloor spreading confirmed, did plate tectonics become undeniable. Wegener did not live to see his theory vindicated. He died in 1930, lost in the Greenland ice, while gathering more data. His vision, once ridiculed, became the foundation of modern geology. For us, listening now, the story is a reminder that truth often hides in plain sight, awaiting patience and imagination. The continents were always puzzle pieces. We simply needed to recognize the picture they formed. With the pieces of Earth's puzzle reassembled, Pangea emerges as more than a scientific reconstruction. It becomes a vision of unity, a planet where all land was one. For geologists, this union explains patterns otherwise puzzling. Why the same fossils appear in Brazil and South Africa, why mountain belts in North America line up with those in Scotland, why coal seams and desert sandstones span across continents now separated by oceans. Pangea is not speculation, but necessity. Without it, the record makes no sense. Yet the elegance of the puzzle is matched by its strangeness. Imagine standing on a shore of that supercontinent. To the west lies not another continent, but a single endless sea. Panthalassa. To the east, across deserts and forests, lies no foreign land, but simply more of the same vast continent. Journeys we now measure as intercontinental would have been simple, overland treks. The world was larger, yet in some ways it was smaller, more contained. For life, this unity shaped both opportunity and challenge. Consider the animals and plants that spread across Pangea. With no oceans to block them, species could migrate across immense distances. Early reptiles, amphibians, and plants expanded their ranges, filling niches from coast to interior. But this connectivity also meant vulnerability. When climates shifted or extinction struck, the effects could cascade across the entire landmass. In today's fragmented world, isolation breeds diversity. On Pangea, unity often meant uniformity. The puzzle of continents is not only about geology, it is about the deep logic of life itself. Mainstream science paints this picture with confidence. Geological layers, fossil evidence, and computer models reconstruct Pangea in detail. But speculation lingers at the edges. What colors filled those skies? What scents rose from its endless forests? What sounds echoed across plains that stretched for thousands of miles without interruption? These are questions no dataset can answer. To imagine them is to step into the dreamlike silence of deep time, where knowledge yields to wonder. The puzzle also reminds us of impermanence. Pangea itself was temporary, a moment in the endless cycle of supercontinents. Before it came Rodinia and Nuna, after it came Gondwana and Laurasia, precursors to the modern world, each assembled, flourished, and fractured, leaving only traces in rocks and mountains. Even the continents we know today will not endure. Millions of years from now, they too will drift, merge, and form another supercontinent, sometimes called Pangea Proxima. The puzzle is never finished. It is taken apart and put back together endlessly, with each version both familiar and new. For you listening tonight, perhaps lying in bed, this thought is both humbling and calming. The map we grew up memorizing is not eternal. It is just one page in a book still being written. Our lives unfold in a brief moment, yet that moment belongs to a story vast and ongoing. When we trace the puzzle of continents, we glimpse not only Earth's past but its future, a world always shifting, always reshaping itself, always more mysterious than the lines we draw upon its surface. And so, the puzzle invites us onward. If the continents themselves wander, then what of the creatures that lived upon them? What forests, deserts, and mountains filled Pangea's expanse? To answer, we must step deeper into that world, leaving maps behind and entering the landscapes of the supercontinent itself. To imagine Pangea, we must first imagine the world before it. Hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth was not one but many scattered continents, drifting like rafts on a restless sea. Each carried forests, rivers, and creatures, isolated by wide oceans. Over time, these land masses drifted together, pulled by forces deep beneath the crust. The result was not a quiet merging, but a drama of unimaginable scale. Mountains thrust skyward, volcanoes roaring, oceans closing like curtains on an ancient stage. Geologists call this process orogeny, the making of mountains. As continents collide, their edges crumple and fold. Rocks are thrust upward, and landscapes transform. Today, we see the Himalayas as a living example, born from the collision of India and Asia. But in the late Paleozoic, collisions were even grander. Russia, an early supercontinent composed of North America and Europe, slammed into Gondwana, the vast landmass holding Africa, South America, Antarctica, and Australia. The impact reshaped the face of the planet, welding smaller pieces into one colossal supercontinent. Pangea, the Appalachians in North America and the Urals in Russia still bear witness to this drama. Once towering as high as the Himalayas, they are now worn down by hundreds of millions of years of erosion. To walk their slopes today is to walk on the bones of an ancient collision, the remnants of Pangea's birth. Beneath the soil, the rocks remember pressure and heat so intense they melted and recrystallized, locking the story into their structure. Volcanoes flared as well, painting the skies with ash and fire. Subduction zones, where one plate slides beneath another, released plumes of magma that erupted in vast chains. The air must have been thick with smoke, the land scarred by lava. For the creatures alive at that time, these events were cataclysmic. Whole habitats vanished, replaced by molten rivers and new mountains. Yet out of destruction came creation, fertile soils, new niches, fresh landscapes for life to explore. The closing of oceans was equally dramatic. The Arctic Ocean, once vast, disappeared as Gondwana and Laurussia collided, shorelines crumbled, shallow seas drained, and marine ecosystems collapsed or adapted. Where water once spread endlessly, now land rose, joining fragments into unity. This relentless process was not quick. It spanned tens of millions of years, but in geological time, it was swift, a reshaping of the planet's architecture. For us today, it is almost impossible to grasp such scale. We measure change in years or decades. Earth measures in millions. What feels permanent, coastlines, ranges, seas, is merely temporary, awaiting the next tectonic shift. The birth of Pangea reminds us that our planet is alive beneath our feet, its crust a restless skin stretched over fire. As the continents drew closer, Earth itself must have seemed unsettled. Earthquakes rippled across the merging boundaries, reshaping coastlines overnight. Rivers changed course, valleys lifted, and ancient forests were swallowed by rising ridges. The slow drift of continents, almost invisible on a human scale, was in truth a ceaseless force of destruction and renewal. Creatures that once thrived along gentle shores found their homes crushed or buried, while others adapted to mountain valleys and high plateaus where climates shifted dramatically. The union of Gondwana and Laurussia was not a simple fusion, but a sequence of collisions, each one producing new landscapes. The Hercynian Mountains rose in what is now Europe, while vast uplifts marked Central Asia. These chains, now worn and softened, were once jagged skylines of raw rock. In their shadow, climates transformed. Rainfall patterns shifted, deserts spread, and inland seas vanished, leaving behind salt flats and fossilized shorelines. Life adapted, but the upheaval left scars both visible and hidden in the strata. Volcanic activity surged, releasing gases that altered atmosphere and climate. Lava poured across plains, covering thousands of square kilometers. Ash darkened skies, perhaps for years at a time. Imagine standing on that landscape, the ground trembling beneath your feet, horizons glowing red with molten rivers, thunder echoing not from storms but from eruptions. To the creatures alive then, such changes must have felt apocalyptic. And yet, from these fiery crucibles, new environments emerged, fertile soils enriched by volcanic ash, niches for species to exploit, challenges that drove evolution forward. The joining of continents also created inland regions farther from the sea than any place today. In these interiors, climates turned extreme. Summers burned with relentless heat, while winters froze under bitter cold. The lack of moderating oceans meant wild swings of temperature and moisture. These conditions forged some of the planet's first great deserts, vast arid stretches larger than modern Sahara. Fossils found within them, reptile tracks, burrows, and plant impressions, reveal that life endured even in such extremes, carving survival strategies out of scarcity. Mainstream geology reconstructs these events with confidence, yet gaps remain. How violent were the earthquakes? How frequent were the eruptions? How quickly did climates shift? Models provide outlines, but imagination must supply texture. It is here, in this blend of science and speculation, that Pangea's birth becomes more than data. It becomes a story of Earth in motion, a reminder that continents are not boundaries, but characters, colliding and reshaping the stage of life. For those listening now, perhaps with eyes heavy, this vision is both immense and soothing. We are reminded that upheaval is not the end, but part of the planet's rhythm. Mountains rise, oceans close, and landscapes change, but life continues, adapting in ways we cannot always see. Pangea's birth was violent, yet it set the stage for worlds of possibility. By the time Pangea fully assembled, the Earth had become something new, a world of extremes forged through relentless tectonic drama. The once separate continents were now fused into one colossal landmass, stretching nearly pole to pole. Mountain ranges scarred its surface like stitches in a grand seam. Volcanic arcs testified to the violence of their union, while the remnants of vanished oceans lay buried as fossil-rich sediments. The stage was set for a chapter unlike any before. The supercontinent's creation did not only reshape the land, it redefined the oceans as well, where seas once lay between drifting continents. Now, only a single vast expanse remained. Panthalas, its currents circled the globe without interruption, carrying heat and nutrients in unfamiliar patterns. Meanwhile, smaller inland seas became trapped within Pangea's embrace, often shallow, salty, and prone to evaporation. These shifting waters influenced climate across the entire planet, linking distant ecosystems in ways still being studied today. The consequences for life were profound. Habitats changed on continental scales, forcing plants and animals to adapt or vanish. Species that had evolved in isolation now mingled, sparking competition and diversification. Fossil records show creatures spreading across Pangea's connected landscapes, their tracks preserved in sandstone that once formed ancient deserts, from amphibians lurking in swampy lowlands to reptiles venturing into arid interiors. Evolution quickened its pace under the pressures of a reshaped world. And yet, for all its immensity, Pangea was fragile. The very forces that built it were already preparing to tear it apart. Beneath the crust, convection currents churned, restless, carrying the seeds of future rifts. Just as Pangea had been born of collisions, it would one day fracture, birthing new continents and oceans. The supercontinent's lifespan, long by human measure, was fleeting in geological time. Its creation was only one act in the endless play of assembly and dispersal. For us, the birth of Pangea offers both knowledge and reflection. Science shows us the mechanics, plates colliding, mountains rising, seas closing, but imagination fills the silence, the thunder of eruptions, the grinding of stone upon stone, the stillness after oceans disappeared. In these visions, Pangea becomes more than a geological fact. It becomes a living memory of Earth's restless spirit. As you drift deeper into thought or perhaps towards sleep, let this image linger. The world remade, continents stitched into one, oceans gathered into a single endless sea, life reshaped under new skies. From chaos and collision came unity, and within that unity, the seeds of future change. When Pangea stood as the Earth's singular supercontinent, it was surrounded by something even more astonishing, Panthalassa, the world ocean. Unlike today, where the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian divide the waters, Panthalassa was a single, unbroken expanse. Imagine standing at Pangea's shore and gazing outward. No matter which direction you looked, the horizon was water stretching into infinity. The very scale of it defies imagination. One ocean girdling the entire planet. Science reconstructs this ocean with fragments of seafloor and the chemistry of ancient rocks. Tectonic plates spread ridges across Panthalassa, creating volcanic islands that rose like isolated beacons in an endless blue. Its currents, unconstrained by continental barriers, circled the globe in patterns unlike anything today. Some models suggest powerful gyres, swirling systems that distributed heat unevenly, driving extremes of climate across Pangea's coasts and interior deserts. The ocean was not passive, it was the beating heart of the planet, shaping weather, ecosystems, and survival. For life, Panthalassa was both cradle and frontier. Marine creatures flourished in shallow coastal seas, where reefs built by sponges and early corals hosted a dazzling variety of species. Trilobites had faded by then, but ammonites spiraled through the waters, while early sharks prowled the depths. Fish with armored scales darted between coral thickets, and reptiles began experimenting with aquatic lifestyles. Yet most of Panthalassa was not shallow reef, but deep abyss, vast, dark, and almost unknowable. Even today, we struggle to comprehend such expanses, and in deep time, they remain all but silent. Speculation enters here, where evidence grows thin. What strange forms may have evolved in those unrecorded depths? Could there have been entire ecosystems, rich and strange, whose soft-bodied inhabitants left no fossil trace? The ocean floor of Panthalassa has long since been subducted into Earth's mantle, recycled into new crust, erasing its archives. Unlike continents, which preserve fossils in rock layers, oceans tend to forget. What survived of Panthalassa's secrets is only what drifted to shore, fossilized in sediments now found on land. The rest is lost, leaving us to imagine what swam in those unending waters. The ocean's immensity also carried atmosphere and climate into new realms. Moisture evaporated from its surface, feeding storms that lashed Pangea's coasts. Hurricanes may have reached sizes unknown today, fueled by uninterrupted stretches of warm sea. Lightning cracked across skies over endless waves, unseen except by whatever creatures dared to surface. Inland, far from the coasts, Panthalassa's influence diminished, leaving deserts parched and lifeless. In this way, the ocean was both giver and withholder, offering abundance to some, denying it to others. For the listener drifting tonight, Panthalassa offers a paradox, the comfort of endless water, yet the mystery of infinite depth. It is a reminder that Earth's memory is uneven, that oceans erase even as they sustain. To imagine Panthalassa is to lean into both knowledge and silence, to feel awe in the face of a world so large it humbles even imagination. Standing at the edge of Pangea, one might have felt both awe and insignificance. The coast stretched on for thousands of kilometers, yet beyond it was only the heaving body of Panthalassa. To early reptiles or amphibians, the ocean was both barrier and opportunity, a frontier that shaped evolution itself. Some species stayed tethered to land and fresh water, while others pressed outward, adapting to salt water, exploring reefs or venturing into open seas. Each step marked the beginning of new lineages, many of which would one day dominate Earth's waters. The scale of Panthalassa also altered climate in ways profound and subtle. With no land to break its currents, heat could be transported across hemispheres, fueling weather extremes on Pangea's coasts. Seasonal monsoons, far stronger than today's, likely drenched regions of the supercontinent before retreating into long, brutal droughts. Inland, deserts expanded because Panthalassa's moisture could not penetrate far enough. The ocean gave rise to abundance at its edges, yet left Pangea's heartlands barren, a striking contrast between coasts alive with reefs and interiors scarred by sand and heat. Geologists find traces of this ocean in the rocks we walk upon today, the limestone cliffs of Europe, the fossil-rich outcrops of Asia, the coral remnants in North America, all whisper of ancient seas that once rimmed Pangea. Within them are ammonite shells, brachiopods, and fish fossils, time capsules of life that flourished along Panthalassa's shores. Each fossil is both a fragment of evidence and a reminder of absence, because for every creature preserved, countless others vanished without trace into the abyss. Speculation deepens when we consider the ocean's interior. Unlike shallow seas that gift us fossils, Panthalassa's vast deep left almost nothing. Entire ecosystems of jelly-like creatures, soft-bodied hunters, and plankton blooms may have risen and fallen unrecorded. Some theorize that bioluminescence played a major role, with creatures lighting the dark in patterns we cannot begin to reconstruct. Imagine an ocean where the night glowed from within, schools of organisms painting currents with light, a silent aurora beneath the waves. No evidence remains, only the possibility, fragile and irresistible. Even islands that rose from Panthalassa's ridges tell stories of isolation. Like stepping stones, they may have allowed species to travel, evolve, and diversify in pockets of separation. Just as the Galapagos shape unique life today, so too might Panthalassa's volcanic islands have incubated strange creatures, their entire histories erased when the islands sank back beneath the waves. To science, this is speculation. To imagination, it is the haunting beauty of lives forgotten. For you listening now, perhaps with eyes closing, the thought of Panthalassa is both infinite and soothing, an ocean without boundaries, without end, carrying secrets that even time itself cannot fully erase. Its memory flows not through water, but through stone and through us, as we dream of worlds vast and unknowable. By the height of Pangea's reign, Panthalassa was not merely an ocean, but a stage upon which life rehearsed dramas that would echo for millions of years. Its coasts pulsed with ecosystems, rich and varied, reefs alive with corals, sponges, and ammonites, tidal flats filled with burrowing creatures, and lagoons where early reptiles tested the waters. To walk along those shores would have been to witness the edge of a mystery, a place where the known ended and the infinite began. The vastness of Panthalassa carried both peril and promise. Storms built strength across thousands of uninterrupted miles, striking Pangea's coasts with unimaginable force. Hurricanes may have towered higher, their winds more violent than anything modern Earth has seen. Yet between these tempests, the ocean's stillness would have been profound. Horizons calm, silence stretching across days, stars mirrored in a black surface unbroken by land. To live beside Panthalassa was to know both fury and serenity, two extremes of a single world sea. Science tells us that its depths were home to predators unlike any we know today. Armored fish, massive sharks, coiled ammonites, as large as car tires. But what of the abyss? The deep trenches of Panthalassa have long since been erased by subduction, their history lost to the mantle. There may have been creatures there whose forms we cannot imagine, whose lineages never survived to leave fossils. The absence itself is haunting, a reminder that most of life's story will remain forever untold, yet echoes of Panthalassa endure in modern Pacific trenches, in the chemistry of ancient rocks, in the distribution of fossils across continents. We still glimpse fragments of its immensity. The Pacific Ocean today is its distant descendant, a reminder of a time when the entire globe was encircled by a single sea. To study Panthalassa is to study both memory and forgetting, what Earth preserves in stone and what it allows to vanish into silence. For the listener now, lying in the quiet of night, Panthalassa becomes more than science. It is a metaphor for the mind itself, vast, mysterious, mostly uncharted. Just as the ocean held secrets never written in stone, so too do our thoughts carry depths unexplored. To rest is to drift upon those waters, trusting that what lies below, though unseen, is part of the same whole. Panthalassa, the endless ocean, whispers a truth as old as time. The world is larger than we can grasp, and its mysteries are not meant to be solved, only honored. If Panthalassa was the vast stage of water, then Pangea's forests were its living heart. Imagine stepping inland from the coast, leaving the salt air behind, and entering landscapes where green seemed endless. Towering trees rose like cathedrals, their trunks broad and straight, their canopies casting shadows that stretched for miles. These were not the forests we know today, with flowering plants and birdsong. Instead, they were ancient worlds of ferns, horsetails, and giant lycophytes, plants that shaped the very air we breathe. During the Carboniferous and Permian periods, these forests produced an atmosphere rich in oxygen. Levels may have reached 30 to 35%, far higher than today's 21%. This surplus of oxygen changed everything. Insects grew to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a hawk's, millipedes the length of cars, scorpions as large as dogs. Each leaf that fell, each trunk that collapsed, added to thick layers of plant matter that would one day become coal seams, fueling civilizations millions of years in the future. To walk through these forests would be to breathe air heavy and sweet, filled with life both wondrous and unsettling. The ground was damp, spongy, littered with decaying vegetation. Pools of still water reflected the canopy, broken by ripples, as amphibians surfaced for air. Some grew as large as crocodiles, their bodies armored, their eyes watchful. They hunted in shadows, waiting for prey to stumble too close. Smaller reptiles darted among roots and ferns, their scales glinting in stray beams of light. It was a world both lush and predatory, where survival depended on agility and adaptation. Science reconstructs these forests from fossilized logs, petrified wood, and impressions of leaves pressed into stone. Coal mines are time machines, revealing entire ecosystems compressed into black rock. Paleobotanists trace the veins of fossil ferns, reconstructing canopies from fragments. Yet beyond this evidence lies silence. What colors filled those canopies? Were the leaves a uniform green, or did unknown pigments cast the forests in hues now vanished? Did the air smell of resin, peat, or something entirely alien? These are questions no fossil can answer, yet imagination invites us to wonder. For life, these forests were more than habitat. They were engines of change. By absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, they reshaped the climate, cooling the planet and altering atmospheric balance. Their contribution was not passive, it was transformative. Earth itself breathed differently because of them. In that sense, the forests were not background scenery, but protagonists in the story of life. For you, listening now in the quiet, perhaps ready for sleep, imagine walking through those cathedrals of green. Feel the damp soil underfoot. Hear the hiss of insects in wings too large to ignore. See shadows ripple across fern-lined pools. It is a world both familiar and alien, comforting and unsettling. A dream of forests lost to time, yet alive again in memory. Deeper into Pangea's forests, the canopy thickened, and light filtered down in shafts that seemed almost sacred. In this dim world, plants reached skyward in competition, forming layers of greenery that stretched from floor to crown. Tree ferns unfurled fronds, the size of sails, while horsetails grew as tall as modern trees, their jointed stalks creaking in the wind. Lycophytes, some more than 30 meters high, dominated the skyline, with trunks that resembled giant scaly pillars. Their roots wove a lattice through the soil, stabilizing wetlands and swamps that pulsed with life. The abundance of plant matter created environments that were both fertile and treacherous. Dead vegetation piled up faster than it could decay, especially in waterlogged regions where oxygen was scarce. Layer upon layer built peat bogs that eventually compressed into vast coal seams. These dark beds of carbon became Earth's memory banks, preserving not just energy but the record of a world long gone. For us today, burning coal is a way of unlocking the sunlight of ancient forests, the stored breath of plants that lived and died in Pangea's green labyrinth. Life thrived in this abundance. Insects dominated the air and floor. Dragonflies with translucent wings spanned nearly a meter, their eyes reflecting pools of light. Giant millipedes, known as arthroplura, stretched longer than a human, crawling across leaf litter like moving logs. Predators adapted to this scale, seizing opportunities that came with such plentiful prey. Amphibians lurked in shaded pools, some with broad heads and muscular bodies built for ambush. Their calls, deep and resonant, must have echoed through the wetlands, blending with the chorus of insects in a soundscape both alien and familiar. Fossil evidence offers details, but imagination fills the gaps. What was the forest floor like underfoot? Perhaps a tangle of roots and spongy moss, with hidden sinkholes swallowing the careless. Did the air hum constantly with wings, a vibration that resonated in the chest as much as the ear? Were the nights filled with bioluminescent flashes, insects glowing faintly as they navigated dark understories? The silence of stone cannot answer, but it invites us to picture such wonders. The forests also bore witness to change. As climate shifted, some regions dried, and the dominance of swamp forests began to wane. New plant groups, including early conifers, took root, able to withstand harsher, drier conditions. Their arrival signaled both continuity and transformation. The forests were not static but evolving, preparing the stage for ecosystems yet to come. For listeners drifting now, the thought of these forests becomes a lullaby of contrasts. Cathedrals of green heavy with oxygen, alive with giants that crawled, flew, and swam. A world both nurturing and perilous, forgotten yet still breathing in every coal seam, every fossilized leaf. As you rest, you might imagine yourself walking there, a wanderer in a realm where time has slowed, and each step carries you deeper into the memory of Earth itself. The forests of Pangea were not only vast in space, but immense in time. Generations of plants grew, fell, and decayed in cycles that spanned millions of years, creating landscapes that must have felt eternal. Yet, within that seeming permanence lay constant transformation. Rivers shifted courses, swamps dried and refilled, and forests marched across continents as climates changed. For the creatures that lived within them, survival depended on adapting to a world that never truly stood still. Among these creatures were the synapsids, sometimes called mammal-like reptiles. They prowled the undergrowth, their jaws lined with sharp teeth, their bodies muscular and efficient. Some, like Dimetrodon, bore dramatic sails along their backs, possibly for regulating temperature or displaying dominance. These animals were neither mammal nor reptile, but ancestors of both, experiments in evolution that would one day give rise to mammals, and eventually us. To see them in Pangea's forests would have been to glimpse the distant seeds of our own lineage. Amphibians remained abundant, clinging to the wetlands that dotted the forest floor. Some were slender and agile, darting through water with quick strokes. Others were hulking predators, waiting patiently in ambush. Fossil trackways suggest they left winding trails through mud, silent testimonies of their daily lives. Insects, too, thrived in niches from canopy to ground. Imagine the constant hum of wings, the rustle of giant beetles in fallen leaves, the shimmer of dragonflies gliding above stagnant pools. For every towering tree, there were countless smaller lives unfolding beneath its shade. The oxygen-rich atmosphere fueled not only size but also fire. With air so charged, even damp vegetation could burn more easily than today. Lightning strikes may have ignited blazes that swept through swamps and forests, reshaping ecosystems in sudden bursts of destruction. Yet fire, as now, also cleared space for renewal, opening patches for new growth. The forests of Pangea were not static cathedrals, but dynamic arenas where creation and destruction danced in balance. Science reveals fragments of this world in coal seams, fossilized leaves, and petrified wood. Paleobotanists study spores locked in stone, reconstructing the communities of plants that once covered the land. But science cannot fully recreate the sensory experience. The air heavy with humidity, the ground spongy with peat, the canopy alive with shifting light. To imagine walking there is to step into a dream built from fragments, a world pieced together from evidence and wonder alike. For you, listening in the quiet, these forests become not only history but metaphor. They remind us that abundance and fragility coexist, that even the richest worlds can vanish, leaving only traces. The coal we burn today is their final whisper, their sunlight released again after millions of years. To breathe deeply now is in some sense to share breath with them, to join a continuum of life that stretches back into Pangea's green embrace. As the age of Pangea advanced, its forests continued to evolve, weaving new patterns into Earth's unfolding story. While swampy coal forests declined in many regions, other plant lineages rose to prominence. Conifers began their ascent, their needle-like leaves suited for drier, harsher climates, unlike the broad fronds of ferns or the fragile stalks of horsetails. These new trees were resilient, able to withstand extremes of temperature and drought. Their arrival marked a transition, forests no longer confined to wetlands but spreading across drier uplands, expanding the reach of green into places once barren. With them came new opportunities for animals. Reptiles diversified, no longer tethered to water, as amphibians were. Some grew armor-like scales, others teeth designed for different diets. The forest became a mosaic of habitats. Dense swamps, open woodlands, and dry highlands, each supported distinct communities of life, weaving complexity into the supercontinent's ecological fabric. Evolution accelerated, fueled by abundance and challenged by change. Yet the forests also bore fragility. Shifts in climate, driven by Pangea's vast size and the restless activity of its tectonic plates, brought periods of aridity that stressed ecosystems. Droughts could wither swamps, and deserts expanded, encroaching on once lush regions. Still, life endured, adapting in form and strategy. Fossils reveal plants with thicker cuticles to resist water loss, animals with new physiological tricks to survive scarcity. Pangea's forests were not static, they were laboratories of resilience. For us, they hold another significance. The coal beds laid down during this era power our modern world, linking us directly to those ancient ecosystems. Every spark struck from coal, every watt generated, is sunlight captured by Pangea's plants released again after hundreds of millions of years. It is a connection at once intimate and sobering, a reminder that our present energy comes at the cost of burning the memory of lost worlds. And still, mystery lingers. How did these forests smell after rain? What hues filled their autumns, if seasons were felt as they are today? Did the buzzing of insects create a constant drone, or did moments of silence settle beneath the towering canopies? We cannot know for certain. The fossils speak in fragments, but imagination supplies the rest, allowing us to walk once more among trunks that touched the skies and ferns that carpeted the earth. For the listener drifting now, this vision closes like a dream. Pangea's forests, rich with oxygen, alive with giants and ancestors, are both gone and enduring. Their roots still lie in stone, their breath still lingers in the coal we burn, their memory still shapes the atmosphere we share. As you rest, let the thoughts settle. You are inhaling echoes of ancient forests, breathing with the ghosts of trees that once swayed beneath Pangea's skies. If the forests of Pangea were its lungs, then the creatures that roamed them were its heartbeat. Life on land had already achieved astonishing variety by the time the supercontinent came together. Among the most striking were the megafauna, large animals that pushed the boundaries of form and function, shaping ecosystems with their size, power, and presence. The most iconic of these early giants was Dimetrodon, often mistaken for a dinosaur, but belonging to a more ancient lineage. Its arched back supported a towering sail of elongated spines, stretched with skin and vessels that may have flushed with color. Some scientists believe it was a solar collector, warming the animal in chilly mornings. Others suggest it was a display structure, signaling strength to rivals and allure to mates. To stand in the shadow of Dimetrodon would have been to witness both predator and symbol, a creature that embodied the experimentation of evolution in deep time. Alongside Dimetrodon prowled other synapsids, sometimes called mammal-like reptiles. These were our distant ancestors, creatures that carried the blueprint of mammals within their bones. Some had sharp canines and muscular jaws, tearing into prey with ferocity. Others were smaller, scurrying in the underbrush, hunting insects and avoiding larger predators. In their diversity, they foreshadowed the rise of mammals long after Pangea fractured. Every breath they drew beneath the fern canopies was a step on the long path that would one day lead to us. But the stage was not dominated by synapsids alone. Amphibians, some massive, still clung to swamps and rivers. Creatures like Eriops, a hulking predator with a broad, flat skull and sprawling limbs, ambushed fish and smaller reptiles along muddy banks. Fossil trackways reveal their heavy bodies dragging across sediment, leaving impressions that speak of patience and power. In wetter regions, these amphibians were apex predators, their booming calls resonating through wetlands at dusk. The skies, though not yet filled with birds, carried life as well. Giant insects thrived in oxygen-rich air. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than modern hawks glided through shafts of light, while predatory griffinflies hunted with precision. To walk through Pangea's landscapes was to live beneath wings that belonged not to feathered creatures but to insects scaled up by atmospheric abundance. Their shadows passed overhead, reminders that even the air belonged to giants. Science reconstructs this menagerie through bones, trackways, and impressions, but imagination paints the rest. What colors did Dimetrodon's sail blaze when sunlight struck? Did the calls of amphibians echo like thunder through swampy valleys? Did insects form clouds so dense they dimmed the forest floor? These are the textures lost to stone, but found again in wonder. For you, listening tonight, imagine stepping into Pangea's wilderness, the air heavy with oxygen, the ground vibrating with movement. Around you are creatures both familiar and alien, each a reminder that life has always tested its limits. The megafauna of Pangea were not just animals, They were experiments written in flesh and bone, rehearsals for futures yet to come. As Pangea's forests and swamps stretched across the supercontinent, new giants emerged to roam its plains. Among them were the therapsids, close relatives of the synapsids, whose varied forms filled ecosystems with predators and grazers alike. Some, like gorgonopsids, bore saber-like teeth and powerful jaws, apex hunters that stalked the undergrowth with terrifying efficiency. Others were squat and heavy-bodied, herbivores that grazed on low-lying vegetation, shaping landscapes much as elephants and bison do today. Their diversity reminds us that the line between reptile and mammal was still fluid, evolution experimenting with forms that bridged two worlds. Equally remarkable were the periasaurs, massive herbivores, armored with bony knobs and ridges. Imagine creatures the size of hippopotamuses, lumbering through ferns and conifers, their skin toughened against predators. They moved in herds, leaving trails through forests and wetlands, reshaping vegetation as they fed. Fossils reveal their broad, flat skulls and sturdy limbs, features built for endurance rather than speed. To predators, they must have seemed formidable walls of flesh, difficult to bring down. The rivers and swamps of Pangea were alive with giants of another kind. Amphibians such as Prionosuchus, stretching nearly as long as a modern crocodile, lurked in waterways. Their elongated jaws bristled with teeth, perfect for seizing unwary prey. To approach a riverbank in Pangea was to risk the sudden snap of jaws from beneath the water's surface. Even smaller amphibians carried unique adaptations, their skulls patterned with sensory pits that detected vibrations, turning the still waters into networks of warning and opportunity. Above ground, reptiles were expanding their reach. Early archosaurs, ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs, began to take shape. They were not yet rulers of the world, but their presence signaled change. Agile, upright in posture, compared to sprawling reptiles, they hinted at futures where speed and endurance would dominate. To see them then was to witness beginnings, creatures not yet iconic, but destined to leave an indelible mark on the history of life. Speculation adds another layer. Did herds of prehistories bellow in chorus as they crossed river valleys? Did gorgonopsids display dominance with roars, or were they silent stalkers, blending into shadows? Did amphibians like Prionosuchus lie in wait beneath lilies, their eyes glinting in moonlight? Fossils provide the framework, but the living essence, the sounds, the movements, the interactions is left to imagination. It is in that silence where wonder takes root. For us today, the megafauna of Pangea offer more than spectacle. They reveal the resilience of life, its capacity to fill every niche with form and function, to test boundaries again and again. They were creatures of experiment, each one a chapter in Earth's story, some enduring, others fading without descendants. To envision them is to honor both the fragility and the creativity of evolution, a reminder that the world has always been stranger and richer than we first assumed. As ages passed within Pangea's vast dominion, its ecosystems grew even more intricate, and with them came new giants that reshaped the balance of power. Among the most intriguing were the docinidans, herbivorous therapsids with beak-like mouths and tusks jutting from their jaws. Fossils show that they were astonishingly successful, ranging from rabbit-sized grazers to creatures larger than oxen. Moving in herds, they would have trampled paths through conifer forests and fern meadows, their tusks perhaps used in displays or digging for roots. They were not glamorous predators, but they were survivors, enduring through climates and extinctions alike, carrying their lineage across tens of millions of years. Predators adapted to this abundance. Rauisuchians, towering Archosaurian hunters, stalked the floodplains and uplands, upright in posture, with powerful legs beneath their bodies. They were more efficient walkers than sprawling reptiles of earlier times. Some exceeded 6 meters in length, with skulls full of blade-like teeth. Imagine the tension of a herd of Dicynodonts grazing as a Rauisuchian emerged from the tree line, its shadow stretching long in the twilight. The forest was a place of constant balance, predator and prey locked in cycles as old as time. The waterways continued to host giants too, early temnospondyl amphibians, some with bodies spanning several meters, thrived in the labyrinth of swamps and rivers. Their wide, flat heads broke the surface like floating logs, their eyes fixed on the movements above. The chorus of croaks and bellows at dusk would have filled valleys, layered with the wing beats of insects and the calls of reptiles. These were ecosystems alive with sound, a world never silent, always vibrating with life. And then came the earliest dinosaurs, small and tentative, moving lightly through undergrowth. They were not yet dominant, but they were agile, two-legged creatures testing new strategies for survival. Compared to the bulk of Ryosuchians and the herds of Dicynodons, they may have seemed insignificant, yet they carried within them the potential for futures that would one day eclipse all others. To imagine them, then, is to glimpse the spark of a dynasty just beginning to kindle. Mainstream science draws these pictures from bone beds, trackways, and sediments, but there are limits. What did a Rauisuchian's roar sound like as it echoed through a conifer forest? Did herds of Dicynodonts stampede in panic, or form defensive circles like modern musk oxen? Did amphibians glow faintly under moonlight, their moist skins reflecting starlight on swampy nights? These details vanish in stone, leaving us only with frameworks. And yet, to wonder is to animate them again, to bring flesh and breath to fossils. For the listener resting now, drifting toward dreams, these creatures are not simply extinct forms. They are reminders of continuity, their struggles and triumphs, their rise and fall are echoes of the same story we live today. The eternal dance of adaptation. The megafauna of Pangea walked under alien skies, but their lives still resonate in ours, written in the deep code of life we carry within. By the twilight of Pangea's great forests and plains, the stage was crowded with life both strange and magnificent. The diversity of megafauna reflected Earth's relentless creativity. Some lineages faded into extinction, leaving no heirs, while others quietly sowed the seeds of future dynasties. Together they created a world of balance and drama, a living theater that existed long before humans dreamed of their own civilizations. Among the most enduring figures were the cynodonts, small but clever therapsids that began to show traits more mammalian than reptilian. Fossils revealed differentiated teeth, incisors, canines, molars, the hallmark of mammals to come. Some may have been warm-blooded, able to regulate their temperature and stay active at times when larger, colder creatures slowed. Those small compared to Rauisuchians or Paraeosaurs, they represented the quiet persistence of life's next chapter, a reminder that survival often favors adaptability over size. Meanwhile, the early dinosaurs continued to evolve. They were not yet the towering giants of the Jurassic, but swift, two-legged hunters and nimble plant-eaters that explored new ecological roles. Their speed and agility gave them an advantage in changing climates. As larger predators like Rauisuchians eventually disappeared, these early dinosaurs would inherit the Earth, rising from modest beginnings to dominance. To stand in Pangea and see them darting through fern glades would be to glimpse the dawn of an era that would last over 160 million years. The coexistence of such varied creatures, titanic amphibians, armored herbivores, saber-toothed predators, and small, quick innovators, created ecosystems of staggering complexity. Each species shaped its world, carving paths through forests, stirring waters, and preying upon or fleeing from others. The land throbbed with life in cycles of birth and death, creation and destruction. For every predator's triumph, there was prey's sacrifice. For every herd that thrived, another dwindled. It was an endless dance of balance. Science provides us bones, impressions, and chemical traces. Yet the true essence of these creatures, their colors, their calls, the way sunlight caught their scales or sails, is lost to time. That loss, however, invites imagination. Did Dimetrodon's sail blaze crimson in the dawn? Did Rauisuchian stalk silently, or thunder through forests with heavy steps? Did cynodonts huddle together for warmth? At night, their breaths visible in the cool air. We cannot know, but we can dream. For you, listening as night deepens, these creatures are more than prehistoric curiosities. They are reminders that life is always in motion, always experimenting, always finding new ways to endure. Pangea's megafauna were not final forms, but chapters in a story still unfolding, their echoes alive within us. As you drift into rest, picture them not as fossils, but as living beings, forests trembling under their weights, skies alive with their shadows, rivers echoing with their calls. They are gone, yet in imagination they still roam. To stand upon Pangea was to stand upon a land of extremes. Its sheer size reshaped climate in ways almost unimaginable today. With so much of the world's landmass fused into one, distances between coasts stretched farther than ever before. Oceans could not carry their moderating influence deep into the interior, leaving vast central regions parched, windswept, and brutal. Pangea was not simply a continent. It was a climate machine, one that generated contrasts of heat and cold, drought and flood on a planetary scale. The interiors of Pangea bore deserts of staggering size. Fossilized dunes from the Permian and Triassic testify to arid regions that rivaled or even surpassed the Sahara. Sandstorms swept across plains for weeks, stripping soil, reshaping landscapes, and burying plant life. Temperatures soared by day and plummeted by night. Only the hardiest creatures could endure. Burrowing reptiles, toughened plants, and insect colonies, finding refuge in the shade of rocks and roots. These deserts were worlds of survival, where life balanced precariously against the vast indifference of climate. Meanwhile, coastal zones told another story. Here, Panthalas's waters breathed moisture into the air, fueling storms and rains. Some regions likely endured monsoons so intense that rivers swelled far beyond their banks, flooding plains and transforming dry basins into temporary wetlands. Fossil trackways revealed amphibians and reptiles moving across mudflats, evidence that these floods brought both danger and opportunity. For creatures living near the margins, each season meant transformation. Forests drowned, then dried, rivers widened, then shrank to threads. Life learned to adapt to rhythms more extreme than any we know today. The poles of Pangea offered yet another contrast. Evidence of glaciation suggests that ice still held sway in high latitudes, even while equatorial regions sweltered. Imagine a single supercontinent carrying deserts near its center, temperate forests along its coasts, and glaciers at its poles. No other era of Earth's history carried such juxtapositions on a single landmass. Pangea was Earth's climate laboratory, testing the limits of adaptation across every possible extreme. Volcanoes added to the drama. Eruptions released gases and ash, sometimes cooling regions, sometimes fueling greenhouse effects that warmed the globe. These fluctuations, layered atop Pangea's geography, created climates of staggering instability. One decade might bring floods, another drought, another bitter cold. For animals and plants, survival meant versatility, the ability to burrow, migrate, hibernate, or reproduce quickly before conditions shifted again. Evolution favored not just strength but resilience, the capacity to bend without breaking. And yet, life endured. Fossils of Dicynodonts and Cynodonts show adaptations to both arid and lush environments. Plants developed waxy coatings to resist water loss, while seed-bearing gymnosperms spread farther than ever before, able to colonize dry uplands. Insects diversified, exploiting every ecological niche. Even in the most brutal regions, trackways and burrows reveal activity, signs that life not only survived but persisted with stubborn tenacity. For the listener tonight, this vision of extremes can carry a quiet lesson. Pangea reminds us that the world is not always gentle, but it is always creative. Where climates test the limits, life answers with resilience. The deserts, floods, and ice of Pangea were not ends, but stages in a grand story, one where survival itself became the greatest act of all. To understand the climate of Pangea is to imagine a land where the familiar rules of weather were amplified to the point of strangeness. Its vast interior, thousands of kilometers from the sea, endured what scientists call continentality. Climates defined not by gentle moderation, but by brutal swings. Summers could sear with relentless heat, baking soils until they cracked, while winters plunged into icy cold, stripping the land of vegetation. Without oceans to soften the seasons, life was forced to adapt to cycles of extremes or perish. The fossil record reveals hints of this adaptation. Burrows preserved in stone suggest that many creatures took refuge underground during the hottest months, escaping the punishing sun. Others may have migrated along ancient river valleys, following water as it waxed and waned. Insects, resilient as always, developed life cycles aligned with fleeting bursts of rain. Their swarms would have darkened the skies after storms, feeding amphibians and reptiles in sudden, frantic abundance before vanishing again into dormancy. Life pulsed in rhythms set by climate, appearing in explosions of vitality, then retreating to silence. In other regions, the extremes manifested differently. Along the coasts, monsoonal systems likely shaped entire ecosystems. Seasonal rains drenched lowlands, creating lush habitats for plants and animals. But as swiftly as they came, the rains withdrew, leaving behind cracked mudflats and evaporating ponds. Fossils capture this cycle. Amphibian tracks imprinted in drying sediments, fish skeletons clustered in shallow basins, plants preserved in alternating layers of wetland mud and desert sand. It was a world where plenty and scarcity followed one another in rapid succession, a constant reminder that balance could never be taken for granted. Meanwhile, higher latitudes may have carried cooler, wetter climates. Glacial deposits and sedimentary patterns suggest ice sheets still lingered in polar regions, even as the equator burned. Imagine herds of synapsids roaming temperate valleys beneath glaciers that glittered in the distance. Within the same supercontinent, deserts, monsoon forests, and icy wastes coexisted, a patchwork of extremes stitched together on a single canvas of stone. Volcanic activity intensified these contrasts. Massive eruptions spewed ash into the skies, temporarily cooling global temperatures, then followed by greenhouse gases that drove warming. Climate models suggest that fluctuations could be sudden, destabilizing ecosystems already stretched to their limits. Species that survived were those able to adapt not just once, but again and again. Survival became less about domination and more about flexibility, an evolutionary lesson written into the bones of Pangea's creatures. And still, resilience prevailed. Gymnosperms spread across drier uplands, their seeds carried by wind into new niches. Synodonts and dicynodonts evolved into forms that could thrive in both arid and fertile environments. Amphibians remained plentiful along floodplains, their persistence a quiet defiance against shifting conditions. Even in the harshest deserts, traces of burrows and footprints tell us that life never fully surrendered. Pangea's extremes did not extinguish life. They sculpted it, sharpening its edge, testing its resolve. For the listener tonight, these images may feel both overwhelming and calming. They remind us that change, however violent, is not always the end. Extremes forge resilience, and survival can take forms we might not expect. Just as Pangea's creatures endured heat, cold, flood, and famine, so too do we find ways to endure the extremes of our own lives. In this, the story of deep time becomes not just history, but quiet reassurance. By the late Permian and early Triassic, Pangea's climate had become even harsher, testing life at every turn. Inland deserts expanded, leaving vast seas of dunes that rolled endlessly beneath scorching suns. Fossilized sandstones in present-day North America, Africa, and Europe preserve the memory of these deserts, their cross-bedded layers whispering of winds that blew unbroken across thousands of kilometers. To creatures that wandered there, the land must have seemed infinite, a horizon of shifting sands where shade was rare and water even rarer. Yet even in these bleak expanses, life endured. Reptiles, with tough, scaly skins, resisted dehydration, while plants adapted with waxy leaves and deep roots, clinging to survival at the edge of possibility. Far from these deserts, coastal regions revealed a very different world. Here, fertile floodplains burst with greenery after seasonal rains, only to wither again in drought. Fossil pollen shows the spread of seed-bearing gymnosperms, hardy plants that could colonize uplands and recover quickly after fire or dryness. They became anchors of stability in a world otherwise unstable. Animals followed these cycles, moving with the rains, congregating at rivers when they swelled, dispersing when they shrank. The rhythm of feast and famine became the rhythm of survival. Yet, extremes carried danger beyond heat and drought. Volcanic events periodically altered the atmosphere, throwing Earth into chaos. The eruptions of the Siberian Traps near the end of the Permian released gases that triggered global warming, acidified oceans, and destabilized ecosystems. The resulting crisis, the Permian Triassic extinction, wiped out over 90% of species. Even before that cataclysm, smaller events must have forced creatures to adapt quickly or vanish. To live in Pangea was to live on a planet always on the edge, where prosperity could shift to catastrophe with terrifying speed. For survivors, these challenges shaped resilience. The cynodonts, ancestors of mammals, evolved whisker-like sensory systems to navigate in darkness, a trait perhaps linked to adapting during environmental stress. The cynodonts ranged widely, their tusks and beaks suited for varied diets in landscapes where food could vanish overnight. Insects diversified explosively, their rapid reproduction, allowing them to thrive even as larger species faltered. Life's tenacity was its greatest weapon, a quiet persistence in the face of unrelenting change. Mainstream science outlines these extremes with evidence: dune formations, glacial deposits, volcanic ash layers, and fossilized trackways. Yet beyond data lies imagination. What did it feel like to endure Pangea's deserts, to hear the howl of winds over empty plains? What was it like to huddle in a burrow during a flood, the roar of waters above muffling all sound? Did herds migrate across thousands of kilometers, driven not by choice, but necessity? These are experiences we can only guess, yet they remind us that survival is always more than statistics. It is lived reality, filled with struggle and adaptation. For you listening now, in the stillness, these visions carry a soft truth. Life endures not by resisting change, but by flowing with it. Pangea's extremes carved away the fragile, leaving behind the adaptable. In that lesson lies comfort, even when the world feels harsh. Resilience takes root, just as creatures of deep time endured deserts, storms, and fires. So too can we endure our own seasons of trial. In the long story of Earth, survival itself is a form of quiet triumph. When continents collide, the Earth folds and crumples like paper pressed too tightly. Nowhere is this more evident than in the mountains born from Pangea's assembly. During the late Paleozoic, the collisions that stitched together Gondwana, Russia, and smaller landmasses raised vast ranges across the face of the supercontinent. Today, their remnants lie worn and humble, but in their youth they were as mighty as the Himalayas. Jagged peaks, piercing the skies, crowned with snow, carved by glaciers, and roaring with rivers fed by meltwater. Among the most famous of these ranges were the Appalachian Mountains, now softened hills stretching along North America's eastern edge. They were once a towering cordillera formed when ancestral North America collided with parts of Africa and Europe. Picture cliffs sharp as blades, valleys deep as canyons, waterfalls plunging into mist-filled gorges. Their height rivaled modern Everest, yet time has reduced them to rounded ridges and wooded slopes. Erosion is relentless, shaving peaks into dust, carrying their bones to the sea. The Appalachians remind us that what seems eternal is only temporary, that even the grandest ranges surrender to time's patient hand. Far to the east, another collision gave birth to the Ural Mountains, stretching between what we now call Europe and Asia. Their jagged length marked the seam where continents fused, forming a boundary that still endures today. In their prime, the Urals would have been formidable walls, influencing climate, river systems, and the movement of species. Herds of periasaurs may have grazed in their foothills. Amphibians may have nested along their streams. These were not empty landscapes of stone, but living corridors, teeming with life shaped by altitude and water. The rise of such ranges was more than spectacle. It was transformation. Mountains altered rainfall patterns, casting rain shadows on one side and feeding forests on the other. They split ecosystems, forcing species to adapt or migrate. Their rivers carried nutrients to floodplains, fueling fertility in distant lands. Mountains are not just scars of collision, they are engines of change, reshaping both land and life. Yet, as mighty as they were, mountains are fragile in a way that continents are not. They are temporary structures built by uplift but dismantled by erosion. Over millions of years, wind, ice, and water wore them down grain by grain. Today, we hike their softened ridges, unaware that they were once peaks rivaling the Himalayas. Erosion is Earth's great eraser, sweeping away the evidence of heights once unthinkable, leaving us only with whispers in stone. For the listener tonight, this story carries both awe and calm. Mountains rise in fire and collision, then fall in silence, their memories carried away in rivers. Just as our worries feel towering today, but fade with time, so too do mountains shrink into hills. The rise of Pangea's ranges teaches us humility, but also reassurance. Nothing endures unchanged, and in that truth lies peace. The Appalachians and Urals were not alone. Across Pangea, other orogeny mountain-building events unfolded as plates pressed together. In Europe, the Variscan orogeny raised vast ranges through what is now France, Spain, and Germany. Their sharp peaks once towered like alpine giants, but today they lie as subdued hills and plateaus, softened by hundreds of millions of years of erosion. The fragments that remain are like scattered notes from a forgotten symphony, suggesting grandeur we can no longer hear in full. Mountains are Earth's archives, yet also its most fleeting. Their birth records collision. Their sediments capture ancient seas. Their rocks lock in heat and pressure from deep within. But erosion erases. Rivers grind valleys. Glaciers carve cirques. Winds scour summits. Over time, the sharp edges dull. The heights collapse, and the memories vanish into oceans as silt. If mountains are libraries, then erosion is the slow hand that turns their pages to dust. What forgotten stories did the vanished peaks hold? Perhaps clues to climates, ecosystems, or even species we will never know, their fossils crushed, their sediments carried far away. And yet mountains leave legacies, even as they fade. The sediments they shed enrich lowlands, feeding soils that nourish forests, swamps, and later farmlands. Coal seams, limestones, and sandstones that formed in Pangea's time carry echoes of uplift and erosion. Rivers born in these mountains carved networks that structured migration routes for creatures, shaping where synapsids hunted, where amphibians spawned, where plants spread their spores. Mountains, even in their decline, guided the course of life. Speculation invites us deeper. Imagine climbing one of Pangea's mountains at the height of its power. The air would thin, the temperature drop, clouds swirl around ridges, herds grazed in alpine meadows, streams sparkled with clarity, and winds carried the scent of resin from conifers clinging to slopes. Perhaps glaciers gleamed on summits, reflecting sunlight across valleys teeming with ferns. To stand there would be to witness not stone, but a living theater, where altitude sculpted entire ecosystems. Yet, with time, such summits crumbled, leaving only traces hidden beneath soil and forest. For the listener drifting now, there is comfort in this rhythm. Mountains remind us that nothing, not even stone, is permanent. What seems immovable yields to time, reshaped into something gentler. Just as peaks erode into valleys, our greatest struggles soften with memory. Our tallest fears diminish with distance. The Appalachians, the Urals, the Variscans, once titanic, now quiet ridges, show us that even grandeur bows to patience. So as you rest, let the image settle, mountains rising in thunderous collision, reaching heights that touch the sky, only to sink slowly, gracefully, into rolling hills. Their stories are gone, yet their presence lingers, shaping rivers, soils, and landscapes still. Pangea's mountains were titans of their age, now humbled into whispers of stone, and in their story lies a truth as timeless as sleep itself. Even the tallest peaks eventually rest. When we think of Pangea, we imagine towering mountains, endless deserts, and herds of reptilian giants. Yet the true foundation of that world was invisible, the microscopic life that quietly shaped every ecosystem beneath the ferns, within the swamps, and drifting across Panthelassa's waves, existed a realm of organisms too small for the eye, yet powerful enough to influence climate, evolution, and the planet's chemistry. Without these unseen worlds, Pangea's grandeur would never have existed. In the swamps and wetlands, microbial mats flourished. These carpets of bacteria and algae clung to mudflats and shallow pools, binding sediments into layered structures. Some resembled modern stromatolites, domed colonies that record billions of years of microbial history. Their photosynthesis released oxygen, feeding the already rich atmosphere that allowed dragonflies to grow, giant and amphibians to thrive. Every breath drawn in Pangea's forests was partly the gift of microscopic architects, laboring silently in film-thin sheets across water and soil. Soils themselves teemed with life. Fungal networks stretched beneath roots, trading nutrients with plants. Bacteria broke down fallen leaves, recycling carbon into the air and minerals into the earth. In wetter places, decomposition slowed, peat bogs accumulated, and the work of microbes shifted. Methanogens, microorganisms that produce methane, thrived in anoxic pockets, subtly altering the composition of the atmosphere. Even the climate extremes of Pangea were influenced by the quiet balance of gases released by invisible workers in its soils and swamps. In Panthalassa, the story continued. Plankton, both plant-like phytoplankton and animal-like zooplankton, drifted in vast blooms. They formed the base of oceanic food chains, sustaining fish, ammonites, and marine reptiles. When plankton died, their remains drifted downward, creating rainfalls of organic matter that fed deep-sea ecosystems. Over millions of years, their skeletons of calcium carbonate and silica built sediments that hardened into chalks and cherts, silent records of life too small to see, but too abundant to ignore. Without them, Panthalassa would have been a desert of water. With them, it teemed with hidden abundance. Speculation draws us closer to wonder. Were the plankton blooms of Panthalassa so vast they stained the ocean surface green or red, visible even from the coasts of Pangea? Did microbial mats in swamps glow faintly with bioluminescence, casting eerie light across fern thickets on moonless nights? Did fungal spores drift on winds so thick they turned sunsets hazy with microscopic life? Fossils rarely preserve such details, but imagination suggests they may have been part of Pangea's daily rhythms, subtle yet profound. For the listener resting now, the thought of these microscopic worlds offers a reminder. Greatness often begins in silence. The giants of Pangea depended on invisible allies, just as we do today. Each breath we take is filtered, balanced, and enriched by microbes that endure unseen. As you drift towards sleep, let the image of those hidden worlds comfort you. Vast tapestries of life woven from threads too small to see, yet strong enough to shape entire continents. The microscopic realms of Pangea were not confined to swamps and seas. They pulsed through every layer of the environment. In rivers and lakes, algal blooms painted the water in hues of green and red, feeding fish and amphibians. These blooms, while life-giving, may also have caused periodic die-offs, releasing toxins that disrupted ecosystems. Even in deep time, balance was fragile, hinging on the invisible work of single-celled organisms. Their abundance meant prosperity, their collapse, catastrophe. Fungi, too, played a central role. Networks of mycorrhizal fungi stretched through soils, binding plants into silent symbiosis. These networks shared nutrients, communicated stress signals, and stabilized the soil against erosion. Without fungi, Pangea's great forests could not have thrived. Fossil spores and impressions show their presence, but the full extent of their underground webs remains hidden. To imagine them is to envision an invisible nervous system beneath Pangea's surface, binding forests into one living whole. In arid regions, microbes adapted differently. Cyanobacteria formed thin crusts across desert soils, capturing moisture and preventing erosion. These fragile layers, sometimes only millimeters thick, held ecosystems together. They fixed nitrogen, enriching soils for sparse vegetation. Without them, deserts would have shifted more violently, dunes erasing all traces of life. These microbial pioneers proved that even in Pangea's harshest landscapes, the smallest organisms carried the weight of survival. Speculation takes us further still. Were their symbiotic relationships lost to time? Plants glowing faintly with microbial partners, animals hosting microbes that shaped behavior. Could microbial mats have produced pigments that painted entire wetlands in colors alien to modern eyes? Such details are absent in stone, but the possibilities remind us that the microscopic world is not static. It is endlessly inventive, exploring combinations and strategies that may never return. And in the oceans, plankton continued their quiet dominion. Their blooms may have fed massive food chains, while their deaths pulled carbon to the seafloor, regulating climate in cycles invisible to surface dwellers. In this way, plankton were climate engineers, altering the composition of the atmosphere long before humans ever appeared. Their legacy endures in rocks we still mine today, in chalk cliffs that rise like ghostly reminders of their vanished abundance. For the listener now, these unseen worlds offer perspective. The giants of Pangea inspire awe, but it was the microbes, plankton, and fungi that sustained the balance of life. Their labor was constant, their influence profound, their presence largely forgotten. To breathe, to eat, to live, even in deep time, depended on the smallest of actors. As you drift into rest, let that truth soften your thoughts. Strength is not always measured in size, but in persistence, in quiet work that endures beyond memory. Every age of life on Earth has its trials, but none compare to the calamity that struck at the end of the Permian, roughly 252 million years ago, known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or more hauntingly, the Great Dying. It was the single most catastrophic event in the history of life. More than 90% of marine species vanished. On land, 70% of vertebrate lineages disappeared. Entire ecosystems collapsed, leaving silence where once there was abundance. Imagine Pangea in its prime. Forests of conifers and ferns stretching for miles, rivers teeming with amphibians, herds of dicynodonts grazing, Rawasuchians prowling. Then imagine those same landscapes emptied. Valleys grew quiet. The chorus of insects stilled, wetlands drained of life. Oceans, once brimming with ammonites, trilobites, and corals, became graveyards. To walk across that world in the aftermath would have been to step into silence, the sound of absence louder than any storm. What could cause such devastation? Science has pieced together several suspects, each plausible, perhaps intertwined. One of the most prominent theories centers on volcanism. In what is now Siberia, vast eruptions poured lava across millions of square kilometers, forming the Siberian Traps. For hundreds of thousands of years, these eruptions spewed carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur into the air. The skies darkened with ash, temperatures spiked, oceans acidified, rain turned toxic with sulfuric compounds. The very air and water that sustained life became agents of its undoing, but volcanism alone may not explain the full scale of loss. Another suspect is the release of methane hydrates, frozen reserves of methane trapped beneath the seafloor. As global warming intensified, these deposits destabilized, releasing vast quantities of methane into the atmosphere. Methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, and its surge could have tipped Earth into runaway warming. Oceans warmed, circulation faltered, and oxygen levels plummeted. Marine life suffocated in waters once full of abundance. On land, Heat waves and droughts scorched forests into collapse. Some scientists also speculate about an asteroid impact, though evidence is less conclusive than for the later extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs. Still, craters and geochemical signatures hint at the possibility that Earth may have suffered a double blow: fiery eruptions from within and bombardment from without. Whether or not an asteroid struck, the combined stresses overwhelmed the resilience of life. The Great Dying was not a single event but a cascade atmosphere, oceans, and ecosystems unraveling together. The scale of loss is difficult to fathom. Coral reefs, which had flourished for hundreds of millions of years, vanished completely. Trilobites, once ubiquitous in oceans, disappeared forever. Vast groups of amphibians dwindled to remnants. Forests withered, soils eroded, deserts expanded. Fossil layers from this time reveal barren gaps, evidence of ecosystems not just thinned, but erased. The silence in the record is chilling, a pause in life's symphony where nearly every instrument fell quiet. For us, the Great Dying is both a scientific puzzle and a haunting reminder. It shows how fragile life can be, even after hundreds of millions of years of resilience. And yet, it also whispers of survival, of the few lineages that endured, carrying the story forward into the Triassic, into the age of dinosaurs, and eventually into us. But in that moment, the world stood at its lowest ebb, a planet reshaped by fire, gas, and silence. In the aftermath of the Great Dying, landscapes once vibrant became barren. Forests thinned into skeletal stands of trees, their roots no longer anchored in fertile soil. Rivers carried ash and eroded sediments, staining waters black and red. Fossil pollen records show sharp declines in plant diversity, signal that ecosystems collapsed, not just in animals but in the very foundations of vegetation. For tens of thousands of years, the land lay scarred, recovery faltering like a flame struggling against the wind. The oceans fared no better. They became hostile, stripped of oxygen in vast stretches, a condition scientists call anoxia. In these suffocating seas, fish and invertebrates perished, and entire food webs unraveled. Evidence in rocks shows layers rich in pyrite, a mineral that forms in oxygen-poor environments, testifying to oceans turned stagnant and toxic. Hydrogen sulfide, released from microbial blooms in these conditions, may have poisoned coastal waters and even seeped into the atmosphere. For marine creatures, survival was nearly impossible. Ammonites, brachiopods, and countless other groups teetered on the brink of extinction. For many, the brink became the end. And yet, some lineages endured. Small, adaptable reptiles found ways to survive on land, exploiting niches left vacant by vanished giants. Burrowing animals may have been shielded from temperature extremes, their subterranean refuges buffering the chaos above. In the seas, a handful of fish and mollusks clung on, their descendants slowly diversifying once stability returned. These survivors were not the mightiest or the most magnificent. They were the most adaptable, the ones able to endure hardship and scarcity. Evolution's harsh lesson was that resilience, not size or strength, defines survival. Speculation deepens the haunting atmosphere of this time. Imagine walking through a valley where once herds of periasaurs grazed. Now the ground is littered with bones, the silence broken only by the wind. In the forests, once filled with dragonflies and synapsids, there is no movement, no sound of wings or calls. The rivers, once alive with amphibians, flow sluggish and empty. Even the insects, usually indestructible in their abundance, diminished, their silence a sign of just how total the collapse had been. This was not merely extinction, it was erasure. Scientists approached this event with caution, piecing together causes from fragmented records. Each layer of volcanic rock, each chemical anomaly in sediments, each sudden drop in fossil diversity adds detail to the puzzle. Yet uncertainty lingers. Was volcanism the prime cause, with methane and anoxia as consequences? Did an impact tip the balance? Was it a perfect storm of disasters converging at once? The evidence is compelling but incomplete. leaving room for debate and for awe at the sheer scale of what Earth endured. For us today, the Great Dying offers a mirror. It reveals how interconnected Earth's systems are, how atmosphere, oceans, and life are bound in fragile balance. Disrupt one and the others follow. For creatures of Pangea, the collapse was final. Their lineages ended in silence. But for those that survived, it was a reset, a narrowing of the evolutionary tree before new branches could grow. From devastation came opportunity, though it would take millions of years before life regained its former diversity. For the listener tonight, drifting between thought and rest, the story of the Great Dying is not just tragedy, it is also a testament to persistence. Even when 9 of every 10 species vanished, the story did not end. The silence was deep, but not absolute. Life whispered still, carrying the tale into the ages to come. Recovery after the Great Dying was not immediate. For millions of years, the Earth remained a wounded world. Fossil records show what paleontologists call a dead zone, layers of rock nearly barren of fossils, a bleak testimony to ecosystems struggling to return. Where once there had been forests, there were now scrublands of hardy plants. Where oceans had thrived with reefs and fish, there were microbial mats carpeting seafloors, simple life reclaiming ground abandoned by complexity. Evolution had been pushed back, and only with patience did it begin to climb again. Eventually, new players emerged, and the oceans, mollusks, and ammonites slowly recovered, adapting to warmer, more acidic waters. Corals, long vanished, gave way to different reef builders, like sponges and algae. On land, early archosaurs, ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs, began to appear, filling niches left empty by the extinction. Cynodonts, small but resilient, diversified as well, carrying the spark of mammals into the uncertain future. The world had been emptied, but the emptiness created space for something new. Speculation invites us to imagine what was lost forever. Entire lineages erased without fossils. Creatures that thrived for millions of years but left no record in stone. What fragile civilizations of life may have risen. Elaborate insect societies, unique amphibians, forests with unrecorded flora, only to be annihilated, leaving not even a whisper behind. The Earth is a patient archivist, but even it forgets. Erosion, burial, and deep time erase countless stories, reminding us that what we know is but a fragment of what once was. The haunting part of the Great Dying is not only its scale, but its silence. Later extinctions, like the one that ended the age of dinosaurs, were dramatic but quicker to recover. The Permian-Triassic event lingered for 5 million years. Ecosystems remained fragile, prone to collapse at the slightest stress. Imagine living through such an age, where every storm, every drought, carried the threat of extinction anew. Life endured, but it walked a razor's edge, cautious and diminished. Science offers caution here. A Great Dying warns us how small changes in atmosphere and climate can cascade into catastrophe. Volcanism and methane transformed the world, not gradually, but in tipping points, thresholds crossed until systems spiraled out of balance. Today, scientists study this past not only to understand ancient life, but to glimpse warnings for our own future. The Great Dying whispers across time. Balance is precious, and when it falters, consequences are vast. For you listening now, the tale carries weight, yet also solace. Even in the deepest silence, when life seemed nearly extinguished, resilience remained. A few lineages clung on, seeds of renewal in a world swept clean. From devastation came dinosaurs, mammals, and ultimately us. The Great Dying was not the end, but a turning point. Proof that life, though fragile, is also unyielding. As you drift into rest, hold this thought gently. Even in Earth's darkest chapters, silence was never absolute. Somewhere, in burrows and shallow seas, life endured, waiting for its chance to bloom again. And so it did. Out of loss, new worlds were born. Out of silence, new songs began. If the birth of Pangea was a drama of collision, its breaking was a slow unraveling. written not in sudden violence, but in patient separation. Around 17.5 million years ago, deep within Earth's mantle, convection currents stirred, tugging at the great supercontinent's seams. For tens of millions of years, stresses built beneath the crust until cracks appeared, valleys sank, rifts opened, and magma welled upward to create the first outlines of new oceans. The unity of Pangea, which had lasted for nearly 60 million years, began to fracture. The earliest signs of this breakup can be traced in the Central Atlantic. What we know today as the Eastern America slowly drifted from the coasts of Africa and Europe. Fossils and rock formations, once aligned across the supercontinent, began to separate, mirrored on opposite shores like halves of a broken mirror. Lava poured through rift valleys, forming vast basalt flows preserved today in places like the Newark Basin of North America and the cliffs of Morocco. These volcanic provinces marked the beginning of a process that would reshape the globe. As rifts deepened, water rushed in, narrow seaways expanded into new oceans, and ecosystems adjusted. Marine life found fresh coastlines to inhabit, while terrestrial animals encountered barriers where none had existed before. Migration routes were severed, isolating populations that had once ranged freely across Pangea. Isolation fostered diversification. Species that were once connected began to evolve separately, setting the stage for the distinct continents and unique lineages we recognize today. The fragmentation of Pangea was not a clean break, but a staggered process, unfolding differently across the globe. In the north, Laurasia, comprising North America, Europe, and Asia, began to take shape. To the south, Gondwana split into Africa, South America, Antarctica, India, and Australia. These divisions would continue for over 100 million years, as the single landmass stretched and tore like dough pulled apart by invisible hands. Mountains once joined became separated by seas. Forests once continuous became fragmented across continents. Climate, too, responded to this slow shattering. The vast deserts of Pangea's interior shrank as coastlines multiplied, bringing moisture deeper inland. Rainfall increased and ecosystems transformed. Regions once locked in drought gave way to lush forests and wetlands, supporting new bursts of diversity. Yet, along rift zones, volcanic activity released gases and ash, triggering periods of instability. It was a world of contrasts, destruction and creation, desolation and renewal. As Earth reshaped its surface, speculation draws us into the experience of this transition. What would it have felt like to live on Pangea as it fractured? Perhaps earthquakes rippled through valleys as rifts widened, rivers diverted into new channels, and coastlines sank beneath rising seas. Perhaps herds of dinosaurs found their migratory routes blocked by widening gulfs, their descendants diverging into unique species on either side. Perhaps forests at the edges of rift zones burned in volcanic fire, only to regrow in fertile ash. To the creatures alive then, the breaking of Pangea was not a map drawn in hindsight, but a lived reality, a world where familiar paths ended and new ones began. For us, the breakup of Pangea is not only a geological fact, but a reminder of impermanence. Unity, however vast, is temporary. The earth gathers, then scatters, again and again, in cycles beyond human timescales. To imagine Pangea's fragmentation is to accept that change is inevitable, that nothing remains whole forever, and that in breaking, new worlds are born. As Pangea continued to tear apart, the landscape became a patchwork of rift valleys, volcanic plains, and widening seas. What had once been the unity of a single colossal continent gave way to outlines we would eventually recognize as the early Atlantic, Indian, and Southern Oceans. The rift zones themselves became cradles of both destruction and renewal. Lava fountains painted the skies, while new coastlines blossomed with ecosystems adapted to brackish lagoons and tidal estuaries. The supercontinent's undoing was as creative as it was violent. One of the earliest and most significant breaks was the division between what we now call North America and Africa. Evidence for this separation remains etched in the geology of both continents. Identical rock formations, ancient fault lines, and fossil patterns that once matched perfectly before drifting apart. Today, the Atlantic Ocean stands between them, but its first stirrings were rivers and narrow seaways carving through rift valleys. Dinosaurs roamed along those shifting margins, unaware that they stood on shores that would one day divide continents. Meanwhile, Gondwana, the southern half of Pangea, began its own unraveling. South America inched away from Africa, Antarctica began to loosen its grip, and India drifted northward on a collision course with Asia. These separations unfolded over tens of millions of years, too slow for any creature to notice in a lifetime, yet inexorable in their momentum. The continents were like slow ships leaving harbor, never to return in the same formation. The breaking of Pangea profoundly altered climate patterns. As new oceans formed, moisture could penetrate farther inland, softening the harsh continental interiors, where once vast deserts stretched without relief. Forests and wetlands expanded, supporting a surge in biodiversity. New coastlines became corridors of abundance, rich with marine and terrestrial life. Yet the transition was not uniform. Volcanic eruptions from the Central Atlantic magmatic province spewed gases that may have triggered warming episodes, stressing ecosystems even as new habitats emerged. Life endured, but it endured amid constant change. Speculation offers another layer. What did these transitions feel like to the creatures alive then? Herds of early dinosaurs may have migrated through rift valleys, their calls echoing off volcanic cliffs. Flying reptiles could have soared above new coastlines, their shadows falling on beaches forming for the very first time. Amphibians that had once thrived in freshwater basins may have found their habitats salinized by intruding seas, forcing adaptation or extinction. The breaking of Pangea was not just a geological process, it was a lived drama, shaping the daily realities of every organism. The separation also sowed the seeds of future diversity. Isolation became a driver of evolution. Populations split by oceans evolved independently, giving rise to new species, new forms, new adaptations. Just as Darwin would later note on the Galapagos, isolation is a crucible of creativity. The shattering of Pangea, painful though it was, laid the foundation for the staggering variety of life we know today, from mammals to birds, from flowering plants to coral reefs. Much of Earth's later richness traces back to the opportunities created when the supercontinent fell apart. For the listener tonight, the story carries a deeper meaning. What feels like breaking is often transformation. Pangea's fragmentation, though it ended unity, was also the beginning of something greater. A planet alive with diversity, complexity, and renewal. To imagine it is to accept that endings are rarely final. They are thresholds, gateways to worlds yet to come. By the Jurassic period, the breakup of Pangea was well underway. Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south drifted apart, their coastlines carved by new oceans. The Atlantic widened, seaways deepened, and ecosystem diversified in isolation. What had once been a single stage for life became multiple arenas, each with its own dramas of survival and adaptation. The Earth, once unified under Pangea, began to resemble the patchwork of continents we know today. This slow-motion transformation had profound effects on life. Dinosaurs, already on the rise, found themselves divided across new landscapes. Some lineages flourished in isolation, adapting to unique climates and food sources. Others dwindled, cut off from ancestral ranges. On Gondwana, giant sauropods grew to colossal sizes, while in Laurasia, smaller and swifter forms evolved. These differences were not random, but the direct result of separation. The evolutionary experiments of continents set adrift. The seas told a similar story. As Panthalassa broke into smaller oceans, currents shifted and new marine corridors formed. Fish, mollusks, and marine reptiles diversified, each ocean fostering distinct ecosystems. Coral reefs reappeared after their collapse in the Great Dying, built by new groups of organisms, better suited to altered chemistry. Isolation nurtured variety, and variety built resilience. The oceans became laboratories of renewal, their richness shaped by the breakup of the supercontinent. Geology preserves vivid traces of this era. The basalt flows of the Central Atlantic magmatic province mark volcanic outbursts tied to rift valleys, later filled with sediments, hold fossilized remains of dinosaurs, plants, and fish that lived at the edges of a breaking world. Rocks on opposite sides of the Atlantic still bear the same signatures, proof that they were once joined. Each cliff face, each canyon, whispers of unity lost and oceans born. Speculation allows us to glimpse the lived reality of this slow fracture. Imagine standing on a rift valley floor, cliffs rising around you, lava glowing in fissures at night, rivers cut through fresh rock, flowing towards seas that widened each generation. Dinosaurs walked these valleys, their footprints preserved in mud that hardened into stone. Perhaps storms gathered over nascent oceans, lightning striking black basalt shores, the smell of sulfur heavy in the air. For the creatures alive then, these landscapes must have felt both perilous and full of possibility. The breaking of Pangea also reveals a deeper truth about Earth. It is never finished. Continents assemble, fracture, and wander, repeating cycles across billions of years. Pangea was not the first supercontinent, nor will it be the last. One day, long after us, the continents will converge again, forming a new unity under skies we will never see. The breakup we recount tonight is but one chapter in an endless book of gathering and scattering. For the listener resting now, there is comfort in this perspective. What feels like destruction often births renewal. Pangea's fragmentation scattered its unity, but in doing so, it seeded diversity, resilience, and wonder. Our world, with its distinct continents, unique species, and varied climates, exists because Pangea broke. From that loss came abundance. From division came beauty. As you drift into sleep, let this truth settle softly. Even in breaking, the earth is creating, and every ending carries the promise of a beginning. Though Pangea itself dissolved more than 75 million years ago, its fingerprints remain etched across today's landscapes. We may not walk upon its unified plains, but the evidence of its once mighty presence surrounds us, hidden in mountains, fossils, and even the genes of living creatures. To look closely at Earth is to glimpse fragments of a lost whole. The Appalachian Mountains are perhaps the most vivid reminder. Today they appear as gentle ridges cloaked in forests, their peaks softened by time. Yet once during the collision that built Pangea, they rivaled the Himalayas in height and ferocity. Their rocks still tell the story. Folded strata testify to continental collisions, while mineral seams trace the heat and pressure of ancient upheaval. Stand on an Appalachian overlook today, and though the slopes seem quiet, you are gazing at the bones of Pangea, worn down but enduring. On the other side of the Atlantic, the anti-Atlas Mountains of Morocco hold the same memory. Their rocks match those of the Appalachians almost perfectly, as though two halves of a torn book. Before Pangea broke apart, they were neighbors, parts of the same mountain chain. Now an ocean separates them, but the match remains undeniable. To imagine these ranges rejoined is to see Pangea stitched together again. Its seams revealed not on maps, but in stone. Fossils, too, whisper of this lost unity. Identical species of ferns and reptiles are found on continents now thousands of kilometers apart. The plant Glossopteris, for example, left fossil leaves across South America, Africa, India, and Antarctica. These scattered remains are like breadcrumbs leading back to a time when all those lands were one. Without the concept of Pangea, their distribution makes no sense. With it, they form a perfect map of ancient connections. Animal lineages tell a similar tale. The fossil reptile Mysosaurus, a freshwater dweller, is found in both South America and Southern Africa. It could never have swum across an ocean as vast as today's Atlantic, which means those continents were once joined. Even living creatures bear echoes of these separations. Marsupials dominate Australia, but are rare elsewhere, the result of isolation after Gondwana fragmented. Their story, traced backward, leads us to the supercontinent's embrace. Speculation deepens the wonder. If we could peel back the oceans and rewind the drift of continents, we would see familiar coastlines sliding back into place. North America nestling against Africa, Europe pressed against Greenland, South America curving snug against West Africa's bulge. India would slide back into Antarctica, Australia drawn close. In that moment, today's fragmented map would dissolve, replaced by the single silhouette of Pangea. The world as we know it would vanish, revealing instead the unity beneath the division. For the listener tonight, the lesson is quiet but profound. The world we see, continents apart, oceans between, is not eternal. It is a snapshot of movement, a single frame in Earth's long film. Beneath its surface lies continuity, connections that endure even when hidden. The echoes of Pangea remind us that the Earth remembers more than we do, and that in its memory, nothing is ever truly lost. Beyond mountains and fossils, Pangea's echoes can be traced in the very fabric of today's geography. Look at a world map, and you will see the evidence staring back. The bulge of Brazil fits neatly into the curve of West Africa, like puzzle pieces separated by distance, but still shaped by their original union. Greenland's southern coast aligns with northern Europe, and India's northward charge into Asia continues the momentum begun during the supercontinent's breakup. Our maps are not random. They are scars of ancient seams, records of drift carved into the planet itself. The oceans also preserve whispers of that lost world. Magnetic stripes on the Atlantic seafloor mark the slow widening of the ocean since it first split Pangaea apart. These symmetrical patterns, like barcodes of stone, show where new crust formed as continents drifted away from each other. Every stripe is a timestamp, a geological diary of separation that began nearly 200 million years ago and continued still. In the pool of tides and the drift of continents, Pangaea's fragmentation is ongoing, a story not finished but unfolding beneath our feet. Living organisms bear the imprint too. Fossil lineages help us trace connections, but DNA carries a subtler memory. Genetic studies reveal how populations once linked were sundered by drifting continents. Birds in South America and Africa share ancient relatives. Plants in Australia echo lineages from South America and Antarctica. Even today, species separated by oceans carry genetic signatures that testify to a time when land bridges were real, when migration was possible, when unity reigned. Life, like stone, remembers. Speculation invites us to play with the imagination. What if we could walk through today's world with Pangaea's map laid over it? Driving through the Appalachians, we might see their continuation rise again in Morocco. A hike in Antarctica's frozen valleys might reveal the same fern forests that once grew in India. The kangaroos of Australia and the armadillos of South America might be neighbors once more, their lineages entwined instead of divided. The world would feel both familiar and strange, its borders erased, its connections restored. And yet the echoes of Pangea are not only physical, but philosophical. They remind us that division is temporary, that unity precedes separation, and that the Earth's surface is in constant motion. The mountains, fossils, and genomes are proof that what appears fractured was once whole. They are whispers across deep time, reminders that we live not on isolated continents, but on pieces of a single drifting puzzle. For the listener tonight, the comfort lies in perspective. The continents beneath our feet, the forests we walk through, the animals we see, all carry traces of a deeper unity. Nothing is truly separate. Everything is connected by roots older than oceans. So close your eyes and imagine Pangea is to feel that unity again. A world where every horizon led not to sea, but to land, to forests, to valleys, to mountains that belong to one great whole. Long after Pangea crumbled, its ghost lived on in the imagination of humankind. We did not see its mountains rise or its forests burn, yet the idea of a single unified world lingers in myths, stories, and dreams. Across cultures, legends of golden ages, vast continents, and lands lost to time may be unconscious echoes of our fascination with unity, a longing for a world before fragmentation, before division. Consider the myths of lost continents: Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, imagined lands swallowed by oceans. Though born from philosophy, folklore, and colonial encounters rather than geology, these stories share a resonance with the truth of Pangea. They whisper of lands once whole, civilizations destroyed, worlds erased. Science tells us Pangea was not inhabited by humans. Yet our yearning to explain scattered coastlines and shared fossils once fueled speculation that continents had been joined. Long before plate tectonics, human imagination grasped at the memory of unity. Mythology offers other parallels. Stories of giants, dragons, and gods of the earth may be poetic ways of grappling with the strange shapes left by fossils. A saurian skeleton, uncovered by ancient eyes, could become a dragon's remains, its bones folded into cultural memory. The enormity of mountains, remnants of Pangea's collisions, inspired tales of titans who fought and fell, their struggles carved into stone. Though not literal memories, these stories embody the same impulse that drives us today to connect the incomprehensible vastness of geology with the human scale of narrative. In literature, the idea of one land, one world persists as an alluring motif, from epic fantasy realms like Tolkien's Middle-earth to speculative science fiction, imagining supercontinents of alien planets. We return to the archetype of unity. A single landmass feels mythic, evoking ideas of shared destiny and unbroken connection. Perhaps it is because our own fragmented map feels temporary, an interruption in the deeper story of Earth's cycles. Pangea becomes not just a geological fact, but a canvas upon which human longing is projected. Speculative science, too, engages imagination. Reconstructions of Pangea Proxima, the future supercontinent expected to form hundreds of millions of years from now, captivate the public. We marvel at maps showing all modern continents rejoined, oceans rearranged, climates transformed. Though purely theoretical, these images stir something primal. They remind us that Earth is restless, that what was once will be again. In this sense, imagination is not at odds with science, but entwined with it, helping us grasp the scale of time and change. For the listener tonight, this blending of myth and geology offers comfort. The dragons of legend, the giants of folklore, the lost continents of story, all are mirrors reflecting our desire to find meaning in Earth's deep past. Science cautions us to separate evidence from fantasy, yet the yearning itself is real and enduring. Pangea inspires us not because we lived upon it, but because we sense in it a truth about unity, loss, and the eternal cycles of the world. If science gives us the skeleton of Pangea, imagination supplies the flesh. Across disciplines, artists, writers, and philosophers return again and again to the image of a united world. It is not only the scale that attracts us, but the symbolism. One land beneath one sky, a place without boundaries, in an age defined by division. The memory of unity carries a quiet power. Speculative maps of ancient Earth often find their way into classrooms, novels, even art galleries. Children trace the outlines of South America against Africa, noticing how they fit like puzzle pieces. Writers seize upon these shapes, weaving tales of migrations across vanished land bridges, of civilizations erased when oceans rose. Painters imagine vast forests stretching unbroken from pole to pole, peopled with creatures both real and mythical. Even if we know Pangea held no humans, we place ourselves there in story, because story is how we claim belonging. This impulse is mirrored in mythology. Flood legends, common across cultures, may unconsciously echo the deep time cycles of continents rising and seas encroaching. The Norse spoke of Ymir, a primordial giant whose body formed the earth. The Greeks of Gaia and Uranus, titans of land and sky. The Hindus of Jambudvipa, a central continent surrounded by seas. Each reflects a search for origin, a framework for unity before division. Science reveals Pangea as origin, not of humanity but of modern Earth's geography. In that sense, myth and geology meet at a crossroads. One explains in poetry what the other explains in stone. Scientific caution reminds us not to blur the lines. There were no human civilizations on Pangea, no dragons perched on its mountains, no gods roaming its forests. But caution does not erase wonder. The myths endure because they answer a need that science cannot fully satisfy, the desire to belong to something vast and ancient, to connect our fleeting lives with the immense rhythms of the earth. Pangea provides that anchor, a tangible lost world, onto which imagination can graft its yearnings. Speculation carries this further. If humanity could visit Pangea in dreams, what stories would we tell? Would we imagine walking through forests beneath skies split by volcanic fire? Would we place gods upon the mountains, guardians of a world still in the making? Would we invent cities on its plains, reflections of our own longing for order against the chaos of nature? Pangea becomes a mirror, showing us not only the planet's past, but the landscapes of our imagination. For you, listening now, the blending of fact and myth need not be conflict, but harmony. Pangea inspires awe, whether viewed through fossils or folktales, rock strata or stories of giants. The important truth is not that dragons roamed its skies, but that we still dream of them, compelled to weave narrative into silence. The echo of Pangea is not only in stone, but in us, in our relentless drive to find meaning in lost worlds. Speculation allows us to dream of a world that never was, a parallel Earth, where Pangea endures, unbroken beneath a single sky. Imagine gazing at a globe and seeing not the scatter of continents we know, but one vast landmass encircled by the endless sweep of a super ocean. No Atlantic, no Indian, no Pacific, divided by continents, just Panthalassa, girdling the planet, and one continuous expanse of land, stretching nearly pole to pole. Climate would be extreme, far harsher than the diversity we know today. The interiors of such a supercontinent would remain deserts of staggering proportions, with no moderating influence from nearby seas. Summers would burn hotter, winters would freeze colder. Central Pangea might have become a wasteland larger than any Sahara, inhospitable to forests, rivers, or even large animals. Life would cluster at the coasts, where Panthalassa's moisture could soften the air and nourish forests and grasslands. Humanity, had it arisen, might never have thrived inland. Civilizations would hug the shores, cities strung like beads along a single, unbroken coastline. Biodiversity, too, would differ profoundly. On our real Earth, continental drift, isolated populations, allowing evolution to run separate experiments. Marsupials thrived in Australia, monotremes persisted, placental mammals spread elsewhere, insects, birds, and plants adapted uniquely to divided habitats. Without that separation, diversity would have been stifled. Evolution favors variety born of isolation, and without oceans dividing gene pools, lineages might have remained uniform across the land. There might be fewer species, fewer strange forms, a less riotous tapestry of life. Earth would be vast, but biologically quieter, its experiments limited by its unity. Yet such unity carries its own speculative wonders. Migration routes would be endless, uninterrupted by seas. Herds of animals might have ranged from one pole to another, following seasons across a single landmass. Early humans, had they appeared, would never have needed ships to reach distant corners. Cultures would spread more quickly, perhaps leading to global civilizations far earlier in history. One language, one architecture, one mythology magicry have stretched across continents shaped by shared horizons rather than divided by oceans. Where today we marvel at diversity of culture, in Pangea's parallel Earth we might find universality, a human story written in fewer dialects, but shared by all. Speculation continues into climate dynamics. With one superocean, currents would form colossal gyres, moving heat in patterns unimaginable today. Hurricanes, with no continents to block them, might rage across thousands of kilometers, growing to monstrous scales before crashing into Pangea's coasts. Inland deserts would dwarf anything in our experience, their storms carrying sand across entire regions, and polar extremes, with less heat circulation, might have grown colder still. A world of contrast, burning deserts at the center, lush edges on the coastlines, frozen wastes at the poles. For the listener tonight, this alternate Earth invites reflection. Our world is shaped by division, by drift, by oceans that create boundaries and diversity. But in imagining Pangea unbroken, we glimpse another truth. Unity has costs as well as gifts. A single land may sound simple, but it carries deserts without end, species without variety, storms without interruption. The Earth we know, fragmented though it is, may be richer for its brokenness. In this parallel Earth, where Pangea never fractured, the story of life would be profoundly altered. Isolation, the engine of evolution, would be absent. On our Earth, continents drifting apart created islands of opportunity. Australia gave rise to marsupials, Madagascar to lemurs, South America to sloths, and armadillos. With one vast, continuous landmass, those evolutionary experiments might never have happened. Instead, species would spread freely, blurring into homogeneity. We might see a world dominated by a few resilient lineages, spread everywhere from coast to coast, rather than the vibrant patchwork of biodiversity that defines our planet today. Consider the oceans of this world. With Panthalassa uninterrupted, marine life would also have evolved differently. Currents would circle the globe in vast loops, with little complexity from continents to redirect them. Migration for marine animals might be endless, stretching across the entire ocean without boundaries. But coral reefs, so dependent on shallow, divided seas, might be rare or absent. The intricate ecosystems of our oceans, full of niches carved by island chains and continental shelves, could have been far simpler. The super ocean is vast, but its uniformity diminishes variety. And what of humanity? If our lineage had emerged upon unbroken Pangea, civilization might look startlingly different. On real Earth, oceans acted as barriers, slowing the spread of technology and culture, allowing diversity to flourish. But in Pangea's unity, ideas might have traveled swift. Agriculture, once discovered, could have spread across the supercontinent in centuries rather than millennia. The wheel, writing, metallurgy, each innovation might have blanketed Pangea quickly, forging a single global civilization long before recorded history in our timeline. There might never have been isolated cultures, no Mayans separated from Egyptians, no Chinese dynasties apart from Greek city-states. Instead, one sweeping culture, one architectural style, one mythic tradition dominating the entire world. Speculation also tempts us toward darker visions. Without oceans dividing humanity, conflict might have been global from the beginning. With all resources bound within a single landmass, wars could have engulfed the entirety of Pangea. Diversity of ideas may have been stifled, creativity dulled by uniformity. Our world's richness, its languages, art forms, philosophies born in isolation, might have been flattened. Humanity might have achieved unity early, but at the cost of imagination's variety. Climate would have shaped this civilization as strongly as geography. Central deserts, vast and deadly, would have split populations into coastal belts. Cultures might have grown in great arcs along the supercontinent's edges, separated not by seas, but by the impassable wastelands of Pangea's heart. Trade would have traced these arcs, linking east and west through roads that followed coastlines for tens of thousands of kilometers. The Silk Road of our world would pale in comparison to the caravans of this Pangea, endless trails of merchants moving between great cities, strung along a single shared coast. Speculative science offers maps of such a world. They show deserts as oceans of sand at the center, fringed by green margins alive with forests and rivers. Humanity, if it thrived, would live almost entirely at the edges, turning the heart of Pangea into a mysterious, uninhabitable interior. Myths would grow of creatures dwelling in those deserts, gods of fire and droughts ruling lands no caravan could cross. Just as our cultures once imagined sea monsters in unknown waters, Pangea's cultures might have peopled their deserts with dragons and demons, guardians of a forbidden heartland. For you listening tonight, this alternate Earth offers not just wonder, but gratitude. Our fractured continents, though scattered, have given us biodiversity, cultural richness, and countless experiments in survival. An unbroken Pangea may sound majestic, but its simplicity would come at a cost. In imagining what might have been, we better understand the gift of what is. If Pangea had endured into the present, the story of human civilization would be written on a canvas unimaginably vast. Picture cities stretching not along isolated coastlines, but lining the continuous rim of Panthalassa, a ring of light visible from space. There would be no Americas separated by ocean, no Australia apart from Asia, no islands scattered in distant seas. Humanity's destiny would be continental, its horizons endless, its migrations bounded only by deserts and mountains rather than by water. But the price of unity would be fragility, with all of humanity clustered on a single landmass. Natural disasters could have been catastrophic. A single supervolcanic eruption might have threatened global populations at once, its ash blanketing farmland across continents with no refuge beyond the ocean. Epidemics, too, might have spread unchecked, sweeping across Pangea in waves unbroken by water. Where our fragmented world slowed the march of disease and disaster, a Pangean Earth would have amplified them, binding all of humanity's fortunes together for good and for ill. Biodiversity, too, would remain limited compared to our Earth. Cyvolution thrives in isolation, and without separation, fewer distinct lineages would have emerged. Instead of the kaleidoscope of marsupials, placental mammals, and monotremes, perhaps only one group would have dominated. Birds might lack the dazzling diversity of forms they show today. Plants, spread across one landmass, might have remained uniform, fewer unique forests, and fewer floral marvels to discover. The world would feel broad yet strangely repetitive, its ecosystems echoing one another from coast to coast. And yet there is beauty in imagining the myths and philosophies of such a world. A single land might have inspired stories of central deserts as sacred heartlands, places where gods tested mortals with thirst and fire. The mountains, continuous chains stretching for thousands of kilometers, might have been revered as spines of the earth, sanctuaries of wisdom. Humanity's spiritual traditions could have been shared, uniting billions under common myths that spoke of one land beneath one sky. Perhaps dragons, titans, or sky spirits would have been universal symbols, transcending regional boundaries to bind all people to the same narratives. Speculative science invites even more wonder. How would Earth's long-term cycles change if Pangea endured without oceans dividing the land? Heat might build uncontrollably in the interior, fueling vast storms at the edges. Ice sheets at the poles might expand dramatically, plunging Earth into deeper ice ages. Or perhaps the supercontinent's deserts would continually expand, limiting habitable space and keeping humanity confined to narrow coastal belts. Our real world, diverse and resilient, might in fact be more forgiving than the parallel Earth of endless unity. For the listener tonight, the dream of an unbroken Pangea is not just a geological thought experiment, but a reflection of human yearning. We long for unity, for simplicity, for the sense that all humanity belongs to one world. Yet we also thrive on diversity, on difference, on the richness born of separation. Pangea's imagined endurance teaches us that unity alone is not enough, that life and culture grow strongest when shaped by boundaries, by the tension of apartness. So as you rest, hold both visions gently, the grandeur of a single land wrapped in one ocean, and the beauty of the scattered world we inherited. One is a dream of simplicity, the other a reality of abundance. Together, they remind us that Earth is not only what it is, but also what it might have been, and in that contrast lies the wonder of our shared story. Now, as our journey through deep time draws to a close, we return to the quiet thought that began it. Pangea was more than a continent. It was a moment in Earth's story, a fleeting unity in a book defined by endless gathering and scattering. Mountains rose, oceans encircled, forests stretched, and creatures walked, swam, and flew across its expanse. And then, as always, time reshaped it, breaking what was whole into fragments, leaving us with the continents we know today. To reflect on Pangea is to reflect on impermanence. Even the largest structures, mountains higher than Everest, deserts larger than any Sahara, forests spanning thousands of kilometers, were temporary. Wind, water, fire, and time erased them, scattering their memory into stone and soil. If Pangea itself could vanish, what permanence can any human structure claim? Yet there is comfort here too. Just as loss is inevitable, so is renewal. From Pangea's breakup came diversity, resilience, and the earth we now call home. Pangea also lives on in echoes all around us. The Appalachian ridges, the Anti-Atlas in Morocco, the fossils of identical plants and animals found on distant shores, all are whispers of a world that once was. To walk in the Appalachians or stand on a chalk cliff by the sea is to touch Pangea's memory, to stand upon stone shaped in its age. The earth remembers, even when we do not. But perhaps the deepest echo of Pangea is not in stone or fossil, but in imagination. The thought of one land beneath one sky resonates with us because it mirrors something we yearn for: connection, unity, belonging. Myths of lost continents, stories of golden ages, and dreams of future supercontinents all speak to this same longing. We may never walk on Pangea, but in our dreams, we return to it, building castles of thought upon its vanished plains. For you listening tonight, perhaps already drifting toward rest, the story of Pangea becomes more than history. It becomes a lullaby of Earth's memory. It tells us that endings are beginnings, that fractures create beauty, that silence is never absolute. As the continents continue to drift, as oceans widen and close, the Earth will write new chapters, just as it always has. Pangea was one story, another is still unfolding. So let your thoughts rest gently upon this image, a single world, vast and whole, encircled by an endless sea. Imagine forests whispering in the wind, mountains piercing the clouds, rivers running without borders. Then let it fade, as Pangea itself faded into the comfort of sleep. The earth has held countless dreams before us, and it will hold countless more after. Tonight, it holds yours. As we close our journey, think of how Pangea reminds us that Earth itself is never finished. Continents wander, oceans shift, mountains rise and fall. The ground beneath our feet is in constant motion, even if we cannot feel it. What seems permanent is only a pause in a much larger rhythm, a rhythm older than humanity and destined to continue long after us. In that perspective, our worries grow smaller, our nights calmer. We are brief, but we are part of something vast. The story of Pangea is also the story of resilience. From its assembly in fire and collision, through its forests and deserts, to its tragic reset in the Great Dying, life endured. And when Pangea broke apart, life did not falter, it flourished. Diversity blossomed in the spaces created by separation. Dinosaurs, mammals, birds, and eventually humans all owe their existence to that moment of fracture. What felt like loss was, in truth, creation. The earth teaches us again and again, change is not only an ending, but also a beginning. Speculation lets us dream further. What if we could walk its vanished plains tonight in a dream? Perhaps we would see forests glowing with strange insects, hear the calls of creatures lost to stone, feel the weight of air richer in oxygen. Perhaps we would stand on mountains as high as the Himalayas, now worn to gentle hills. Perhaps we would gaze across deserts larger than any today, stretching to horizons where the sky swallowed the land. In dreams, Pangea is alive again, a world of wonder that sleeps within Earth's memory. And so, the reflection becomes personal. We may never see another supercontinent in our lifetimes, but we carry its story. Each breath we take holds oxygen once shaped by Pangea's forests. Each step we walk rests on rocks forged in its collision. Each map we unfold is a reminder that continents are temporary and that unity and division are both essential parts of the Earth's design. The story of Pangea is not remote. It is beneath us, around us, within us. For you listening in the stillness, let this truth bring ease. The Earth has endured cycles of unity and separation for billions of years, and it will endure many more. Our lives are threads in a tapestry woven on scales far greater than we can see. And just as Pangea rose, flourished, and fell, so too will the chapters of our own lives shift and renew. Nothing is lost forever. It only transforms. So rest now, with this final image. The Earth as one land, embraced by one sea, alive with forgotten forests and creatures. Imagine its silence, its grandeur, its endless horizons. Then let it drift away, as all things do, into the gentle tide of sleep. For even in silence, the Earth remembers, and tonight it remembers with you.